At the end of the American Civil War in 1868, there was a creation of a major new form of business structure called the corporation. And these corporations were created to provide legal immunity for the owners and management of the major businesses that were owned by the wealthiest 1% of the people in the country at the time. And they organized a new business model that specifically immunized the owners of the company against any liability for the kind of activities they engaged in at their plants that injured their people, that contaminated the area, the products that might have damaged people, and that this new corporation generated a huge influx of funds from the richest people in the country to industrialize the United States at the time. And because of that, between 1868 and 1898, over a short 30-year period, there rose a whole set of extraordinarily wealthy industrialists that came to be known in American history as the robber barons. That these are the people that came to dominate and control American industry. The steel mills, the Carnegies, the banks, the investment houses that grew up around this whole model of a capitalist corporation in which they could just have people invest money and clip coupons and not be responsible for anything that the corporation did. And what happened is that because the Chautauqua movement was organized by the National Methodist Church, actually. The National Board of Homeland Ministries organized a set of teachings that they were going to be doing for Methodist Sunday school teachers up at their summer camp called Chautauqua. It was up in Lake Chautauqua in northern New York. In actually 1874, they opened the camp up in the summer to invite people who wanted to be Sunday school teachers from around the country to come with their families to spend the summer to be trained to try to get to understand why it is that the conduct of the robber barons that had been growing in the country then for 20 years, by that time almost, that their activities were directly contrary to all of the teachings of the Gospels and were directly contrary to the entire set of Judeo-Christian social ethics that the American culture professed to believe in. And they wanted to instruct the young people coming to Sunday schools in the Methodist churches throughout the country to understand what it was that was wrong with what it was that this robber baron class was doing. And so they began to teach these potential Sunday school teachers from 1874 to 1878 for 4 years. And then they realized that the robber barons were still on the rise and getting stronger and more dominant and more controlling of the American government throughout that period of time. So they decided that they would have to make a radical change, and they wanted to invite all of the high school civics teachers throughout the country to come to the Chautauqua summer camp up in northern New York for free and bring their families and have them also learn about what it was that was so contrary to the Judeo-Christian social ethic that was being engaged in by the robber barons. And what happened is in 1878, there was this major overflow of teachers, of high school teachers from around the country that came to the Chautauqua in northern New York, and there was this huge, overwhelming number of people that came, so they were unable to take care of them. They didn't have any place to sleep, they hadn't any food to eat. And what happened is then it began to rain, and what happened is that the people from all around the counties, around Chautauqua, New York, began to bring food to the people and began to bring tents and help set up tents, etc. It was the actual first Woodstock event. And it was the Woodstock event of the idealist generation of the 20th century. And what happened is the people all stayed there and developed a very intense camaraderie throughout the summer, and they went back to their high schools across the country to teach the young high school students what was wrong with what the robber barons were doing. And that movement in the following year set up 4 regional Chautauquas around the country, and each of them was overwhelmed again by the high school civics teachers coming to be instructed on why it was that the Judeo-Christian social ethic was so much set against what was going on among the robber barons. And it turns out that by 1920, by the summer of 1920, there were over 3,000 Chautauquas that were convened in the summer all throughout the United States, teaching the basic teachings of the Gospels and the Judeo-Christian social ethics, and showing why it was that this major new form of business structure, the corporation and the robber barons, were engaged in conduct that was completely antithetical to the basic moral codes of the people of the United States. And because of that, this Chautauqua movement gave rise to the American labor unions. And it in fact gave rise to the women's suffrage movement, which by 1919 was able to win the vote for women. It gave rise to the anti-child labor laws that began to protect the children from working 7 days a week in the mines. It set up the American public school system, a free public school system, advocating this with Dewey. There were a whole series of major movements. It was the major post-Civil War civil rights movement began out of that, and the American environmental movement began through the Chautauqua movement. But as it turns out, that by 1886, 10 years later, basically, after this major movement began, and they had initiated this new form of labor union, of the workers actually getting to come and band together to establish a power over and against some of these major industries in the steel mills and in the coal mines and in the others. That what happened is there was a major set of rallies that were being held in Chicago in 1886 to demand the 8-hour work week or 8-hour work day. Till that point in time, people had to work 7 days a week, 10 hours a day at least. So what the labor unions were organizing to try to get Sunday off, and they were trying to organize to get an 8-hour work day. And on May 1st of 1886, there was a major march and rally, and general strike was called in Chicago. And all across the United States, these new labor unions organized a general strike. And what happened in Chicago on May 3rd is the Pinkertons and the Chicago police banded together, and they attacked the demonstration. And there were 6 of the labor union people that were killed in that rally. And so what happened is on the 4th of May, there was a major protest organized, and they marched all the way into the Haymarket Square in Chicago. And the police organized and attacked the demonstrators and killed 4 more of the demonstrators and seriously injured 70 of them. And what had happened is that when the police began to move on the demonstrators and began to club them and move them out, someone threw a dynamite bomb at the police and killed 7 of the police. And the police rioted behind that activity and attacked the demonstrators, killing the 4 of them and injuring the 70 of them. And what happened then is there was a major trial was convened, and the 8 of the major leaders of the labor unions were dragged into court and prosecuted for the deaths of the police, and they were sentenced to be hung. And 4 of them were hung, and 1 of them committed suicide in the cell before being hung. and the other ones, the other remaining 3, were in fact pardoned by the new governor when he came to office, saying that the entire trial was a travesty, that there was no evidence that these people were responsible for the bomb that was thrown, and they were pardoned. And since that time, there has been declared International Workers' Day on May 1st. So May Day has these 2 different dimensions. It has the dimension of celebrating the end of winter and the arrival of summer, and the sign of new hope, and looking toward a fruitful change in the weather. And it also has this other dimension of commemorating the struggle that has gone on for so many years on the part of working people to attempt to cope with this new institution of the corporation, and the kind of damage that it inflicts upon men and working women and on the environment. And so the question that we have as we gather together here on this May Day of 2015 is, at the present time, which of these 2 aspects of May Day is it that we ought to be celebrating or commemorating here today? And what I want to do is I want to take a look at some of the, just a handful of the major events that are going on right now in the news, and see if we can draw upon those events to determine which of these 2 aspects of May Day we should actually be focusing our attention on today. Now, the first one of these, of course, is the events that are going on in Baltimore, with the killing of the young man there. That we know that the police have killed this young man, Freddie, and the people rioted behind that. They marched and they had demonstrations. They actually attacked the police when the police tried to break them up and drive them away. And fights broke out, and the police then arrested and beat a number of people. So we have an event going on right before us right now that is very similar to the Haymarket experience that was had in 1886. So the rioting of the police, the use of brutality on the part of the police, the dissatisfaction on the part of a mass-based movement against the police. And yet at the same time, we've seen on May 1st, interestingly, right on May Day itself, we saw the announcement by the local district attorney that there were criminal charges being filed against the 6 police who, in fact, did this to him. In fact, they've indicted, or they've criminally charged one of the police with second-degree murder. And they've charged the others with manslaughter. And so that we have, even in this one particular news event, we have both signs of the need to struggle, to challenge the kind of assembled power that is represented by a militarized police that we have now, with being given battle gear in M16 rifles and Bearcat tanks to be used against the people in the cities. And at the same time, we have reason for hope because of the return of these criminal charges against the people that were responsible here. But what I want to do is I want to sound a note of caution because the mere charging of these people by the district attorney's office should not, in fact, cause us to be over sanguine about what's going on here, because the fact of the matter is we've had experiences over and over again where the actual prosecution of the police is undertaken, and it's undertaken in a manner that will inevitably result in them being acquitted. We had this particular experience that our office represented a group of organizers that were organizing, trying to organize a chapter of the amalgamated clothing and textile workers down in Greensboro, North Carolina, back in 1979, and they were attacked by the Ku Klux Klan in the American Nazi Party because they were organizing black and white people together on an equal basis. And the Greensboro police allowed the attack to take place. And we went in and immediately met with Drew Days, who was the head of the Civil Rights Division under President Carter, and asked for a major federal civil rights investigation against them. But by the time the trial came around, the Reagan administration had come in and had replaced all of the officials in the Justice Department. And so the Reagan administration, faced with the existent criminal charges already filed against them by the Carter administration, took a position of interpreting the Federal Civil Rights Act as authorizing the conviction of these Ku Klux Klan and Nazi Party members only if, in fact, the jury were to conclude that the Klan and Nazis shot these people solely and exclusively because they were black, instead of because they were organizing a labor union. And so that not only did the all-white jury acquit them of the civil rights charges, they also acquit them in a state case of any type of assault on the grounds that it was self-defense, because when the 8 carloads of Ku Klux Klan and Nazi Party people came rolling by, flipping the bird to the demonstrators, etc., one of the demonstrators kicked the front bumper of one of the cars. And so the all-white jury acquitted them on the grounds that it was self-defense for the Klan and Nazis to open up the trunks of their cars and get guns out and carrying photographs of the leaders around and identifying them and shooting them dead in the head, that in fact this was self-defense. And so we had to go in and prosecute them under the civil provisions of the Federal Civil Rights Act, and ended up getting a judgment against them of $1 million and against the city police for allowing this to happen consciously. Now, but that required struggle. That required a consistent attention to protecting the rights of the people that were organizing to try to establish a labor union, a branch of the amalgamated clothing and textile workers. So this experience that we're having right now in the news today of the events that are going on in Baltimore have some indications that we should be pleased with the fact that at least the police have been charged with crime for what they've done, but we cannot stop struggling. That we have to stay attentive, we have to stay directing attention of the world to what's going on there, so these people are not allowed to walk away, because you can see that the entire police department and almost all the authorities and Fox News and all the people around the country, the right-wing people around the country, are all rising up now to insist that these people be acquitted. And they're making charges that the only reason that these charges have been brought against them is because of the pressure that's been put on the law enforcement authorities by people rioting in the streets. And so this particular news item, as I said, has elements of both aspects of May Day. There are some signs of hope that we may be coming to a point where some springtime sun is starting to shine on this issue of police violence against young black men around the country. And at the same time, there is evidence of the need to maintain the struggle that is symbolized by what happened at Haymarket Square back in 1886. Now, there's a second issue that is clearly in front of us on this May Day, and this is the fact that there's been an announcement made on May Day that the United States Congress has passed the USA Freedom Act, which is going to be altering some of the provisions of the Patriot Act to try to do away with some of the worst elements of the Patriot Act that was put into effect by Congress shortly after the events of 9/11. That there are some modifications that are being made. That they are, for example, now going to be requiring that the federal government not be allowed to wiretap all of the telephones in an entire state, for example. And that they need to have a more particular focus on who it is they're going to be gathering the evidence against. And they're also going to now mandate that the FISA court, the intelligence surveillance under the Federal Surveillance Act that was passed by Congress, that sets up a court that issues warrants to the federal government, to the FBI and to the Homeland Security and to the Justice Department to be able to wiretap people's telephones, to be able to monitor all of your communications on your cell phones, to monitor all of your communications on your computer, to monitor what issues you look up on Google, to go into the libraries and find out what books you're reading, et cetera, what videos you're ordering. That court, the FISA court, has been, in fact, been functioning completely in secret ever since it was created. And it turns out that they have been beginning, in the last 3 years, they've been beginning to formulate entire policies in response to the applications that are being made by the Justice Department and other executive branches to do surveillance. They are formulating entire opinions now, extending concepts in various United States Supreme Court cases to authorize and rationalize the wiretapping of more and more people. And they have been keeping those completely secret, top secret. And now the new statute that's been passed is now mandating that those be published. And so that is some advantage. Okay, and so there have been some improvements made on the Patriot Act, but the problem is that the basics of the Patriot Act still are there. And the fact is that the FISA court, the Federal Intelligence Surveillance Act court, they in fact are authorized to issue, under the statute, they're authorized to issue warrants for wiretapping your phones, monitoring your cell phones, monitoring your computers, monitoring your library books and everything else. They're allowed to issue warrants, not on the grounds that there's probable cause to believe that you've committed any crime, but solely on the grounds that there's reason to believe that information in your communication may be of some relevance to the national security of the United States. And we've already had the United States Supreme Court cases that say that particular term of what it is that relates to the national security of the United States is so vague and so overbroad that it cannot be constitutionally enforced unless the state and the federal government is compelled in a case that arises under that doctrine to be able to prove that a given person has a specific intent to commit espionage. And yet those standards are not being applied to the warrants. And so the warrants are being authorized, even under the existent reformed statute, are still being authorized to allow them to surveil everywhere you go, your GPS, your telephones. As you've seen, that your telephones have a secret chip in them that in fact always enables them to know exactly where you are. And they're keeping track of it. It turns out that the companies, the GPS companies that provide that service to your cell phones, in fact, are gathering that information and monitoring where you are at any given time, how many times you go there during the course of a month, how long you spend there, when you arrive and when you leave, and the federal government is getting access to that information. And what the Obama administration is now insisting, continuing to argue, and they've said so in the amendments that have been put in, is that there's no violation of the Fourth Amendment by allowing the private companies to gather all of that information against you and know where you are at any given time and place, and what you're reading, and what you're Googling, and who you're communicating with, and what photographs you're sending to your friends, that is authorized for them to gather all of that together, as Obama says, if in fact they're not allowed to get access to it unless they get a warrant. But the warrant that they're getting is from the FISA court, which doesn't require probable cause to believe that you've done anything wrong at all. So that's the fundamental challenge. So on the one hand, while there is some reason for some hope, some new sunlight with summer coming, of the Democratic Party feeling at least enough pressure on it that it feels mandated to do something to reform the FISA law and to reform the Patriot Act. The fact of the matter is that this entire regime is designed, at the bottom line, if you think about it very hard at all, that it all arose after the 9/11 events, which were all a direct product of the United States invading the Middle Eastern oil fields and occupying the Middle Eastern oil fields. And what happened is that the people of the Middle East, the fundamentalists, rose up to drive these infidels out of their country and from occupying their territory. And that the actions that have been taken against the U.S. embassies in Africa, against the USS Cole in Yemen, against the trade towers, et cetera, these actions are all a response to the United States invasion and occupation of the Middle Eastern oil fields, and that they're attempting to maintain the control and the monopoly over the major oil fields of the world on the part of the 7 major oil corporations that are all members of Aramco. And they've had that exclusive lease agreement since 1922, when the Western powers at the end of World War I set up a commission that was actually chaired by Winston Churchill in 1922 as the Minister of Colonial Affairs for the United Kingdom. And they actually established the boundaries of all of those countries in the Middle East. That these are, for thousands of years, have been tribal territories, but what they did is they superimposed on those territories supposed nation states, creating Lebanon and Yemen and all of the other nation states, completely ignoring the different tribal differences and inside, and the religious differences, etc. And then they're wondering why it is that they're so unstable. And then they appoint a potentate, such as Abdul Aziz in Saudi Arabia, in Faisal in Iraq, and the Kuwaiti royal family in Kuwait, and the Pahlavis in Iraq. They just simply appoint them to be the potentates in those nation states in exchange for an agreement on the part of the 7 major oil corporations to give a percentage of the royalties from the sale of the petroleum to those private families. And the people wonder why the people hate them, and that they're suppressed. The people are repressed by those regimes being financed by the United States. And not only giving them a percentage of the oil profits, but then having those oil profits come back to the United States to buy U.S. military equipment and training, by means of which they repress their people. And so what's happened here is the people have been rising up, and they are attempting to throw off the arbitrary and capricious power of those potentates that have been put in charge by the Western powers, specifically to protect their control of the oil, all on behalf of 7 major oil corporations that are all owned by private families. Now, this is something that was understood by the Chautauqua movement when it began back in 1874 to try to demonstrate why it is that the activities of these major corporations are in fact so completely contrary to the basic ethical principles that are believed in by virtually all of our people. And so that This is an issue that needs to be addressed on May Day here in 2015, because one of the other less well publicized events that happened on May Day is the convening of a major conference in Rome called by Pope Francis to discuss global climate change and the transnational corporate capitalist effect on the world. And they've now convened as of May 1st, and they're meeting at the present time, and they've announced that Pope Francis is going to be issuing a papal encyclical in June on global climate change and the transnational corporate capitalism, calling for the elimination of the capitalist economic system on the planet, and is going to be calling for the establishment of an entire new economic order, and he's going to be addressing the United Nations in September, the entire General Assembly, calling for the new economic order, and in December he's going to be calling a Jubilee year to cancel all of the debts owed to all of the banks in the world, undermining the power of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and all of these bankers that in fact have brought about the major crisis in 2008 by their rapacious lending policies and conduct, in basically making prisoners of half of the people of the world by means of their debt. In fact, the entire transnational corporate capitalist economic system is based upon the need to put people in debt and make them pay interest, which is violative of the most fundamental premises of usury that has been forbidden by the Judeo-Christian ethical principles since the beginning of the Jewish faith. So this is something that is important for us to talk about here today on May Day, because one of the other major events that took place on May Day was the announcement of Senator Bernie Sanders that he is going to be running for the presidency and for the nomination of the Democratic Party against Hillary Clinton. Now, it's important for us to try to think about here on May Day how it is that we are going to respond to this particular announcement on May Day. I don't think it was any coincidence that Bernie Sanders made his announcement on May Day, because a major pillar of his campaign is going to be his call for the elimination of transnational corporate capitalism as the basic mode of economic development and distribution in the world. And so he is in complete sync with Pope Francis on this particular matter. And while Bernie Sanders, the independent senator from Vermont, calling for a new international economic order, may not bring him the nomination, may not bring much of a response of people around the world, when Pope Francis calls for a new international economic order and authorizes all 1.5 billion Catholics in the entire world to refuse to pay the debts to the bank, that has a much greater chance of having major impact around the world. And it can potentially cause substantial uprisings on the part of people in getting in the streets and mobilizing and organizing and conscientizing people around the world about the need to have a new, more just economic order. This is the very issue that brought the people into the streets back in 1888 at the Haymarket on May 1st. And it's the exact same issue that the efforts are being made to repress us. And it's the reason why they have a Patriot Act. It's the reason why they have the National Defense Authorization Act, which now, for the first time, authorizes United States military to arrest American citizens here in the United States without any probable cause to believe that we've committed any crime at all, to take us into custody and refuse to grant us the right of habeas corpus, which means that they have no obligation to bring us before a magistrate to present any evidence to the magistrate as to why it is that they've arrested us and are holding us involuntarily in incarceration, that they've set aside the fundamental right to the writ of habeas corpus, which explicitly states in the Constitution of the United States shall not be set aside. And yet they've done it without any declaration of war on the part of Congress. And the fact is that they also prohibit you from having any contact with an attorney. And they do not have any obligation to allow you to make a telephone call to notify any of your family or relatives that you've been taken into custody. They have the right to hold you indefinitely in a military facility. And in the military facility, you can be subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques. And this National Defense Authorization Act has been not only passed, but it's been signed into law by Barack Obama. And Barack Obama made a signing statement when he signed it, saying, well, as long as I'm president, I won't enforce it against any American. But the fact of the matter is, he now is authorizing the murder of American citizens by drones without any due process whatsoever, without any type of hearings, without any kind of presentation of any evidence to an objective, impartial magistrate, and is authorizing the assassination of American citizens through the drones with full knowledge, in many instances, that they're killing dozens and dozens of completely innocent people at the same time, because he's arguing that it would be too difficult to arrest them. You know, the reality is they don't want to arrest them because they don't want to put them on trial, because if they put them on trial, their defense is going to be that the United States has invaded, you know, a whole territory to occupy the oil fields in the Middle East, and we're all being ordered to pay for it. Now, look at this. These are issues that are important for us to think about here on May Day, because we have to, even at the same time that we're obliged to struggle and to commemorate the past struggles of the times, we need to also look to the new sunlight, to look to the coming of springtime, to look to the potential harvesting of all of the work that we've done now for 50 years, many of us together, you know, because one of the other items in the news, of course, that you've seen over and over again is the 40th anniversary of the so-called fall of Saigon. That you've seen specials on PBS over and over again all throughout the past week, because April 30th/May 1st was the day that the Viet Cong came in and occupied Saigon. And so that they've got all the PBS specials on about this. And we still, after all this time, have not fully learned the lesson of what that was all about. I mean, they actually had PBS had one of the specials on called the Final Days of Vietnam, you know, by Roy Kennedy, which started out with an interview of Patrick Buchanan, basically explaining the rationale behind the Vietnam War and trying to explain that they all thought that they were trying to protect democracy, that they were all trying to protect the rights of the free democratic people of South Vietnam. And everybody with a political IQ above room temperature knows that that's an absolute, unabrogated lie. And the fact is that they knew it at the time. And there was no discussion of the fact that 5 different administrations, Republicans and Democrats alike, from Eisenhower to Kennedy to LBJ to Nixon and Ford, all of them lied to us. It was nothing more than an attempt to invade Southeast Asia to establish a land bridge for U.S. military forces and Western power forces to be able to get access to the resources and the markets in Asia. And that they've been wanting to do that for years. Okay? So this is the insight into this reality is what radicalized and enlightened an entire generation. the entire baby boom generation that was confronted by this bizarre demand that we all be drafted and involuntarily ordered under the threat of prison to go 8,000 miles away and murder people without any explanation of what it is we were doing there, other than trying to protect what anybody who spent 3 days in Vietnam knew was an absolutely fascist regime under Neo Dinh Diem, who had been actually taken from Columbia University and flown to Vietnam and put in charge of an alleged government of South Vietnam by the Eisenhower-Nixon administration. Now, these are things that have been known for decades, and yet the even PBS specials that were on all during the past week in commemoration of the fall of Saigon on May Day, here again of 2015, did not talk about that. And here we are, we find ourselves again now with tens of thousands of U.S. military forces sent into the Middle East, thousands of miles from home, you know, and asserting that the objective, in effect, of why we've gone over there is because those regimes don't let women drive cars. You know, like that's what we're over there for. You know, and nobody tells you about the simple historical facts that in June of 1990, when H.W. Bush was the president, when he started getting information from the CIA that there was a likelihood that the Soviet Union was going to be dissolving voluntarily within a short period of time, the Bush administration, filled with petroleum families like the Bushes, that they in fact were terrified that they were going to lose their ultimate other, that the Soviet Union, the big boogeyman that was justifying $300 to $400 billion military budgets and in massive military spending, that we were going to lose them. And so what he did is he wrote a handwritten note to be sent to Saddam Hussein and gave it to April Gillespie, our ambassador to Iraq, and she went and delivered the note to Saddam Hussein personally, which told Saddam Hussein, said, look, I'm aware of the fact, this is from H.W. Bush, who had every reason to know him because H.W. Bush, when he was the director of the CIA back in 1975 and 76, was delivering money directly to Saddam Hussein to support him overthrowing the government of Iraq, to be put into power as a basic handmaid to the Western powers. And what happened is George H.W. Bush took advantage of the fact that he had this personal relationship with Saddam Hussein. As soon as H.W. learned that the Soviet Union might be dissolving and they were going to lose their ultimate boogeyman to justify a national security state here in the United States, he sends them the handwritten note saying, look, I'm aware of the fact that you're distressed with Kuwait on your southern border, that you believe that they're slant drilling under your borders and taking Iraqi oil. And I just want you to know that if you find it necessary to resort to the use of military force against them, I would not view that as being contrary to the long-term best interests of the United States. And so Saddam Hussein, not to anyone's great surprise, mobilizes thousands of Iraqi troops and sends them to the border, their southern border, with Kuwait. And what happens then immediately is the Secretary of Defense under H.W. Bush in June of 1990, Dick Cheney, contacts Prince Bandar, who was the ambassador to the United States from Saudi Arabia, and has him come to the West Wing and tells him that we have reliable intelligence information indicating that Saddam Hussein is preparing to invade Kuwait. In fact, shows him real-time NSA satellite photos of the troops being assembled, and then goes on to tell him that we also have equally reliable intelligence that once Saddam Hussein goes in and occupies Kuwait, he's going to go on into Saudi Arabia and try to overthrow the House of Saud, of which Prince Bandar was a member, right? And so he said, so what we want to do is that if in fact you see that what we're telling you is true, if this invasion does take place into Kuwait, we want you to have King Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah in Saudi Arabia, he was the son of Abdul Aziz, who was handpicked by Winston Churchill to be the potentate in Saudi Arabia back in 1922, that we want him to invite us in, and we want to invoke a secret treaty, which was signed by Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger back in August of 1972 on their way back from their secret meeting in China on the SR-71 Blackbird. And they landed back in Saudi Arabia and had a secret meeting at that time with King Faoud, or actually with King Faisal at that time. And they entered into a new treaty, renewing the 60-year exclusive lease agreement between Saudi Arabia and the 7 major oil companies of Standard Oil of California, Standard Oil of New Jersey, both owned by the Rockefellers, British Petroleum, Shell Oil, that these 7 oil companies that had this exclusive lease agreement, they wanted to renew the 60-year lease agreement in 1972. And so what they did is they met with King Faisal and said, look, we will agree in the re-signed new exclusive lease agreement, we will agree to allow you to get, instead of 47 cents per gallon at the pump of payments, we'll allow you to get $1.47 per gallon at the pump for your oil. But you have to agree, as a condition of that, to 3 things. Number 1, you have to use a portion of that additional dollar a gallon at the pump. You have to agree to use part of that money to purchase military equipment from the United States, like the AWACS airborne radar and the over-the-horizon radar and F-15 fighter planes, all from American military corporations. Secondly, you have to use another portion of that additional dollar a gallon at the pump to dredge out 4 major harbors in Saudi Arabia to be able to take American warships and build 4 major bases, military bases, with landing strips that can take U.S. military forces to be able to occupy those bases. And thirdly, what you have to do is that in the event that either Russia or China makes any type of a feint to invade the Middle Eastern oil fields, you have to agree to invite the United States to come in with our warships and occupy those harbors and to occupy those military bases to protect the oil fields. Okay, that was the agreement that was entered into in 1972 in August by Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger with King Faisal. They entered the same agreement and the same trip with Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. Okay, that this was a secret agreement that no one knew anything about up until this time. And now here we are, that was 1972 in August. Here we are in 1991, 20 years later basically. And so what they said is that if in fact Saddam Hussein goes in and invades Kuwait, even though it's not Russia or China, what we want to do is invoke the same treaty and have you invite us in to protect you, Saudi Arabia, against being invaded by Saddam Hussein. And so so what happens, of course, is Saddam Hussein goes ahead and invades Kuwait, just like we knew he was going to. And so immediately the officials in Saudi Arabia, through Prince Bandar, contact Dick Cheney, the vice president, and invite him to come to Saudi Arabia. And he goes in and he has a meeting with King Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah, and he pitches this proposal that they be invited in under this 1972 secret treaty to come in and occupy those bases in those harbors. And what happens is that the chief of security for the House of Saud, Turki bin Faisal, who's the son of the former King Faisal, who'd been the chief of security for 26 years for the Saudi royal family, he finds out about this meeting, of course, and he asks King Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah not to agree to do that, but to give him an opportunity to make a proposal as an alternative. And so the following morning, he comes into the meeting with them, Turki bin Faisal, the chief of security of the House of Saud, and he brings with him Khalil Mahfouz, who is in fact the head of the Royal Saudi Royal Family Bank, and also Mohammed Baroum, who is the heir to the wealthiest family in Saudi Arabia that owns all of the steel companies and all of the concrete companies that have been used to build the military bases. And they say, look, we've got an alternative to this. Do not invite the infidels. Do not invite the infidels into the Holy Lands, because if you bring them in, they won't leave. They will stay here. They'll think of some reason for staying here and occupying our country. So don't do this. We have an alternative. And they turn and they open the door, and in walks Osama bin Laden, who is in fact the best friend of Turki bin Faisal since they were 4 years old as children together. And he brings them in and he says, look, we have an alternative to inviting the infidels into the Holy Lands, that here Osama bin Laden has 10,000 battle-hardened mujahideen sitting up in the Khyber Pass who have just gotten through kicking the crap out of the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. And we can mobilize them and push out Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait back up into Iraq. You don't need to invite the infidels in. And so what happens is while King Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah are contemplating the two options, it turns out that Dick Cheney had not left. He was still there at the palace. He asked for another meeting the following morning, and he comes back in, and he says, okay, look, I've heard about this other offer, and what we want to do is offer you a sweetener. What we'll do, the United States will agree that if you invite us in to occupy these military bases in these harbors, what we'll do is we'll agree to protect you not only against Saddam Hussein, we will protect you against your own people. We will prevent you from being overthrown by your own people here in Saudi Arabia because they hate your guts. They hate you and all of your 500 princes whoring around Europe and losing $1 million at a roll of a dice in Monte Carlo in their 500 different Rolls Royces and Bentleys. He said, they hate you, and so we'll protect you against your own people, including the Muslim Brotherhood, the fundamentalist Islamicists who hate you, the Sunnis. Okay? So that was the deal. And so King Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah said, that's a deal. And so they made the deal, and they allowed the United States to come in. The United States spent a few weeks inviting others among the Alliance of the Willing, like New Zealand, and a couple other countries that must have had like 200 military. And then they invade and occupy the Middle Eastern oil field, killing tens of thousands of people, destroying the infrastructure of much of the country. Okay? And they go in and they occupy the Middle Eastern oil fields, because then they say, oh, we're going to drive Saddam Hussein back up into Iraq, but we're not going to take him out of power. What we're going to do is we're going to set up a no-fly zone. We're going to set up a no-fly zone here, and it's going to take 250,000 U.S. military personnel permanently based in your country to administer this no-fly zone. And so they did exactly what it was that Osama bin Laden told them that they were going to do. They were going to occupy the Middle Eastern oil fields. And that's what initiated the jihad. That's why Osama bin Laden and the fundamentalist Islamicists began to mount a major jihad against the Western powers just to drive them out of the Holy Lands. And they attacked the U.S. embassies in Africa and attacked the USS Cole in Yemen. They blew up the Marine Corps barracks. They launched the first attack against the trade towers, setting off the big stink bombs in the basement, etc. So, and that's what began the whole problem until W. Bush ended up coming into power. And when W. Bush came into power, these are other things that you aren't told about, that it is important for you to find out about on May Day. And that is that when W. Bush came into office, he immediately brought in with Dick Cheney as his vice president, and his entire entourage of Paul Wolfowitz and David Addington and Douglas Feith and all the rest of them, that they came back in and they immediately started planning to invade Afghanistan. And because they wanted to put a pipeline through Afghanistan to come all the way down from the Caspian in the Black Sea to bring the oil from there down into a warm water port. And they wanted to put the pipeline right directly through Afghanistan. And so they were negotiating with the Taliban, trying to get acknowledging the legitimacy of the Taliban government to offer them the right to put the pipeline through there. And you know who was negotiating the deal for the pipeline? Was in fact the Carlyle Group. And working for them was Richard Secord, the guy that helped run the Contra weapons supply operations for HW. That he was working for the Carlyle Group, which is the Bushes and James Baker and others. It's a private major corporation of oil interests to get access to the oil up in the Soviet Union and bring it down from the Caspian and Black Seas down through Afghanistan. And it was only when the Taliban government finally broke off those negotiations, telling them that they weren't going to accept that deal, the W. Bush administration decided that they were going to invade Afghanistan. And they were planning to invade Afghanistan in October of 2001. And the problem was that they notified the ambassador to Pakistan that they were going to be doing this, and the Pakistani ambassador notified their ambassador notified the ambassador from Afghanistan, and they told the Taliban about it. And so what they did is they organized a preemptive set of attacks against the United States to stop them from doing that. You know, but nobody tells you this. The bottom line is that they're working on behalf of the people who own the major petroleum companies, and that is what's going on. And those are all people that are owners of the transnational corporate capitalist corporations, and the people have been trying to organize against them, because now we know that they're destroying the world. They're contaminating the entire planet with their carbon emissions. In that it's ruining the environment. So that now we have all of the people who are trying to mobilize and organize against these basic corporations that are polluting the planet in establishing global climate change, which we see now coming into play. And they're now going to start designating all of those people who are organizing in a radical way to try to stop this, because the Congress people, the senators and the Congress people, are all bought off. They're all bought off now with the Supreme Court that's now got the basic corporate lawyers sitting on the Supreme Court ruling that the corporations are people, and the corporations have a right to contribute as much as they want to the campaigns of these candidates. So they're buying the candidates one at a time who are surprisingly refusing to vote to do anything effective about global climate change. And so we try everything that we can through the legal structures. We lobby, we go in and we talk to the congressmen and senators. They don't care what you're saying. They're being paid by the basic corporations. And you try to do anything. You try to sue them in court, and you run into members of the Federalist Society that have all been appointed to the court by Nixon and Reagan and Bush and both Bushes. And so that if you start to mobilize and get in the streets and try to organize against them, sort of like was done on May 1st of 1886 on behalf of the 8-hour workday, if you start to mobilize, they start to designate you as terrorists. And the fact of the matter is, all the legislation that they keep passing under the rubric of terrorism and anti-terrorism also has these little clauses in it. Each one of them have these little clauses in them, like the National Defense Authorization Act of 2006 under W. Bush, that authorized the United States military to go into any state in response to an act of terrorism, or in response to the president's decision that there is any combination that exists in that state which might challenge the normal course of law enforcement, which has nothing to do with terrorism whatsoever. It's just that they're now starting to roll into place the ability to set aside the Posse Comitatus Act, which has been for 200 years, has prohibited the mobilization of U.S. military forces and putting them in the field against American citizens. And they're now authorized to do this in addition to arresting people and putting us in military prisons without any right to an attorney, without any right to trial, and if they put you on trial, they do so in secret with no public allowed in, and they put you in front of a military tribunal. And you're not even allowed to know who your accusers are. And you're not even allowed to know what the evidence is that they're presenting against you. Because if they told you what the evidence was, you might be able to figure out where they got it. It might violate some kind of national security surveillance system they've got going. So you not only don't get to know who your accusers are, you don't know what the evidence is against you, you can't call any witnesses for yourself, you can't cross-examine them, you can't have a lawyer. Now, if anybody believes for a second that this isn't exactly what the truth of the matter is, you need to contact us. You need to contact us at the Romero Institute here in town, because we are in fact organizing to try to establish a Constitution protection zone here in the city. And we're trying to get the County Board of Supervisors to also approve a Constitution protection zone for the entire county of Santa Cruz. This is something that we successfully did after we won the Karen Silkwood case back in 1979. That we did, that I was chief counsel for the Karen Silkwood family, that in that particular case we won a $10.5 million judgment for Karen Silkwood's children. And we got a court order that declared unconstitutional the financial cap that had been imposed on the liability of nuclear power plants by Congress, declared it to be unconstitutional because it violated a person's right to a jury trial of determining what your damages are. And so from the day we won that decision back in July of 1979, there hasn't been a single new private nuclear power plant built in the entire United States. Okay? So we know if the courts are fair and are open, we know how to use that. But what they decided they were going to do, since they couldn't build any more new nuclear power plants, what they were going to do is they were going to remove all of the nuclear waste materials from the 103 nuclear power plants that were in the United States, so they could ship it all to Yucca Mountain and put it under the mountain, and then they could relicense those nuclear power plants, even though they were only built to be safe for 10 years, if you can call it safe, when you look at their safety records. The bottom line is, what we did then is we went to one city council after another around the country and asked them to declare nuclear-free zones. And that this is a nuclear-free zone, and you will not be allowed on trucks or trains to drive that material through our town or through our county. And that's what happened. And so we stopped those people from being able to do that, and so that they haven't been able to build any more nuclear facilities, and those facilities are all getting filled up now, and they're going to come to a point where they can't operate those anymore. Okay? So what we're talking about doing is taking a page from that lesson and establishing constitutional protection zones. And Santa Cruz needs to be one of the first cities in the country to do that. Okay? But the reality is the city council that we have now is not the old city council that we used to have. This is no longer the People's Republic of Santa Cruz. You know, that we have to mobilize on the grassroots level. We have to compel the members of this city council to take the step of approving the resolution that we have proposed. And what we're asking them to do is to follow the lead of the state assembly. The state assembly here in California voted after the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012 that was signed into law by Barack Obama at 11:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve. You know, that they took the position 72 to 1 that they were going to declare it to be a felony crime for anybody to attempt to enforce the National Defense Authorization Act in the state of California. Okay? But what happened is, because they wanted to have, the Democratic Party wanted to have a unanimous vote on this, what they did is in the Senate side, they watered the whole thing down to simply say that it shall be the policy of the state of California that it's unconstitutional for anyone to try to enforce the statute. But what we want to do is we want to put teeth in that, and we want to make it a condition of the future employment of any employee of the city of Santa Cruz or any employee of the county of Santa Cruz, as a condition of their future employment, the instant they hear about any effort to enforce this law in our county, that they contact the city council and contact the board of supervisors, and they immediately convene and take the steps necessary to see to it that anyone is protected against being arrested, that they be taken into protective custody and provided a due process hearing here in our city and in our county. And if in fact they're found not to have probable cause, they're to be put under the protective custody of Governor Jerry Brown in the state of California to protect them against the unconstitutional conduct, because we have taken an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And these are domestic criminals. So please contact us at the Romero Institute. We're right here in Santa Cruz. We're right there. We're right upstairs, I might say, above the Democratic Party headquarters. Come and see us and come and volunteer to help us. We have a workshop here today to give you more details about the particular resolution and how to go about doing it. And the petitions are at the table. We want you to sign the petition because we're trying to get 10,000 people to sign the petition. We have how many signatures so far? 2,000. We have over 2,000 signatures now. But we need your help. Come and see us at the workshop and come and see us at our office. Happy May Day.